Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Gaming News Canada show presented by GBG Plc. I'm your host, Steve McAllister. We have a couple of guests on today's podcast. Ariane Gauthier, the new spokesperson for the Quebec Online Gaming Coalition, will join us a little bit later to discuss an op-ed she wrote last week for Le Journal de Montréal on the state of iGaming in La Belle Province. But first, before he jumps on an airplane for next week's ICE Barcelona conference, we welcome back the President and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association, Paul Burns. Paul, first off, a very happy new year to you and everybody else at the CGA.
Thanks, Steve. Happy New Year to you and the Gaming News Canada team.
And Paul, as I said to Phil Gray when we recorded the first podcast for this week, where we were chatting last week, I mean, it feels that the deja vu all over again, and Groundhog Day too. That whenever I have conversations with people like yourself and Phil and Amanda Brewer in January, I think we always say that, well, this is going to be a busy year, and I think it's probably we're going down the same road again in 2025.
Yeah, we're hoping it is. We're trying to create the activity to make sure it is. And I think that's as I said, January always brings exciting times, a fresh start, and so we're looking to get at it. There's lots on the go. It's been a busy month already, and I'm sure there will be a good time at ICE as we get a chance to connect with a lot of our members and other folks in the industry. So yeah, we're off to a busy start. So yes, it's that's a good thing.
Well, let's start with ice, Paul, and it feels like it maybe will be a little bit of a different dynamic for you next week at that conference than it has been the last couple of years. I was in London 2 years ago for ice, and there was a lot of buzz around the opening of the Ontario market back then. I think there was the buzz was focused on Alberta last year, and I believe Dale Nally, the Service Alberta minister, was in Barcelona to speak to folks at the conference that year. We're heading. Ontario is going to celebrate its 30th anniversary as a regulated gambling market in April. Um, Depending who you talk to right now, that in Alberta, there's a bit of a cone of silence around that, and I think the Alberta government probably has bigger fish to fry right now with the current situation between Canada and the U.S. We'll get into that a little bit later, but just for you, what's next week look like for you at ICE?
Well, it seems to be a bit more condensed this week because it starts full on Monday of the week and for the 3 days. But it um, obviously a chance for us to reconnect and see members and face to face. I also use it a chance to deal with some of my counterparts in different parts of the world. So my friends at the BGC um, and other folks from meetings with regulators from a couple of jurisdictions and some other industry associations as well when I'm there. So it's a chance to compare notes. We're dealing with a lot of our issues are similar in our jurisdictions. It's well, everybody likes to say they're unique, and there's not. There's a lot of commonality in a lot of the things we're dealing with as an industry, from obviously responsible gaming issues, advertising. Um, it's and so it's good to touch base and see what people are doing when it comes to that. I think we've had a um, and that's one of the joys of going is to actually be able to spend some time, quality time with folks and network. So it's a full week for us. We're hosting members in the reception on the Monday evening, and to get things rolling for the week. But no, it's a good chance for us to connect with a lot of the members and other industry folks. So it's I have no time filling a day, and it's a bigger venue. Expecting more people, so chaos. I'm sure it'll be great.
Do you expect have the questions changed, Paul, with regards to Ontario's, since the market opened April 2022? Is it more specifics now to your earlier point about responsible gambling or advertising and marketing, and do you find the conversation has changed a little bit since the market opened here?
A little bit. I don't think, the advertising discussion is happening around us as much as it's happening here. Um, but I think that because so what we've seen is that there's more people talking about the amount of ads than actually the amount of ads. So it's the reality is that there's it's been time, and what we always do. The newness of all of this is slowing down in the sense that um, ads are there. They still amounts to about 2% less than the ads on television. That I think that people understand there are. You see them coast to. I see, depending on what sports broadcast you watch, I see Play Now ads, and I see Play Alberta ads, and I see all kinds of stuff. It's the nature of our broadcasting system, and that's sort of, I think people have begun to understand that. Companies aren't targeting foreign, other provinces outside Ontario. It's the nature of our broadcasting system. And people are learning and understanding better. Um, and when it comes to, for us is ensuring that people understand what is happening in Canada. That's kind of what we talk about. There's a lot of interest in Alberta, only because it is one of the few jurisdictions that and probably the only one in North America that may open in 2025 at the rate they're going. And I think that's important. I think those who've invested in Ontario see the opportunity to leverage that investment into the province of Alberta. And so that's great for Alberta. It's great for the country. And so those are the kind of topics that we get more wrapped up in. As I said, the advertising, which again, there's been a lot of noise, but even Bill 269, a lot of what it was proposing to do is already being done, and that was kind of why I think that there's lots of oversight, lots of rules, lots of people on content controls. I think um, that we've tried to put perspective with the information that we've shared from Media Radar about the volume of ads and the fact that it does only represent 2%. And that even on broadcasts and sports and NHL, it's about 6% of the ads in the game. So, we're trying to bring some rational context to all of this. And especially it helps other provinces as they begin to evaluate this too. And so that's why, a lot of the lottery corp jurisdiction from other provinces, from provinces across the country, will be sending people to ICE, as they always do, and a chance to learn and see what's coming in terms of technology and innovation and who's doing what. And we've, be part of that conversation is always fun.
I will say on the advertising piece, Paul, again, it might just be because I'm watching a bit more sports than usual right now with the World Junior Tournament and the NFL playoffs and that, but there does seem to be a lot more responsible gambling messaging from operators in Ontario right now. I've noticed BetMGM's got I think, a new Connor McDavid commercial out, and again, the Connor McDavid relationship. That's something was beating the drum on when that partnership was
Hmm.
announced 3 years ago, and Sports Interactions doing the same through their Mitch Marner and Leon Draisaitl partnership deals. Bet365, I think, has been pretty proactive from the beginning when it comes to that kind of messaging. And then FanDuel announced before the holidays the launch of the My Spend initiative, and I've been seeing those FanDuel ads with its new RG messaging as well.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what was expected. I mean, the requirements in the relationship with the province of Ontario to spend a percentage on standalone responsible gaming ads. I mean, OLG has done some great ones for the first time in their history over the last year and a bit of standalone ads. Those are great, and that's exactly what you want to continue to build the awareness and education level and knowledge of the tools that are there for operators are providing to players. Um, and because there's a lot of people assume that like, and I've seen articles that mention, well, the advertising drove all this new play because with all these ads came all of this new play. Well, actually, a lot of that play was already there, and that's what we try to tell people. The Canadians have had unrestricted access for 25 years for unregulated online gaming. They've been there. They're spending um, significant amounts. Ontario has demonstrated that bringing it into a regulated market, you get to quantify it, so you actually see how the size of what it is. Um, But we also understand that with that has come some of the most robust regulatory standards in the world, and we're trying to make sure that those can promulgate themselves across the country. Because Alberta as a market, you're looking at it's 700 to 900 million in online gaming, that not including lottery today. Well, AGLC is less than 200 million of that in what they're doing through PlayNet. So there's a significant market out there that's occurring, and that advertising is right. It's there, and why don't you regulate it? And why don't you create some economic benefit for the provinces? And that's the conversation we're going to have a lot of this year with provinces across this country and government officials, because it's the right thing to do.
Hey, Paul, that's a great segue to, the American Gaming Association's been very proactive in when it comes to illegal gambling and pointing it out to government officials and every time the industry gets criticized in the U.S., the AG comes out pretty strongly with this messaging around illegal gambling and why a regulated marketplace is a better place to be. It's not quite as loud in Canada, and again, there's a whole bunch of reasons for
There's some
that.
good
But
ones.
yeah, and just your thoughts on, are there things that the Canadian Gaming Association, is there more that you would like to do with that education around legal gambling? Because again, you've been on this show many times, and we when we talk about some of the coverage of this industry and some of the perceptions by people who aren't familiar with this industry is they do tend to lump in all operators together, and there certainly there's a black and white to this.
Well, and that is exactly the challenge we have, and why we've been very vocal in advocating for expanded regulated markets. Um, the difference between us and the United States is they have actually some pretty definitive laws of what's illegal and what's legal. We don't. And so starting from that there's lines, and we don't have any. There's down there, there's not here. So when you see that in the conversation, it's not going to go away, and you can't ignore it, because there was years ago, it was the DFS world was crowding sports betting, and some people questioned its legality under the laws. Um, and then we brought, online gaming's been around for 25 years for Canadians at least to access online gaming. But now we're talking about things like sweepstakes, and it's a case of laws not keeping pace with technology and innovation. And so if you want to, in really around the same activities, just by the way they're presented, or players participate or compensated in those, that it's a recognition that this is an evolution of the gaming products and technology and innovation that's going to continue. And so you got to start the conversation somewhere, because Ontario's going to have to. We've asked them, well, how are you going to approach sweepstakes? I understand no one's breaking the law, right? The sweepstakes laws are there. They're, people have found a way to offer a product within those. Um, but to understand that then there's an unlevel playing field. And so those are things governments, this isn't something you can do once. And, you know, everybody thought when they put in their gaming control acts in the 80s and 90s, well, we'll never have to touch them again ever. Nonsense. And that's why it's like, get on this and let's have the conversation with industry, and let's get reasonable, rational, regulated environments going. And that's the conversation we're taking directly to governments this year, because it's just time. There'll be something new again in the next 18 months that will push everything a little further, and they need to be able to understand that you have to resource regulators. You have to make sure that you have effective regulatory regime, and then people will play in it. Ontario is a proof positive that if you create a fair and measured regulatory regime, it does set some very tough standards, but industry and technology can meet that, and they have, and they come into Ontario and being very successful with it. And I think that's one of the things we want to continue, and build upon that, and getting other provinces to look at how Ontario's done it, and do what's best for their jurisdictions in the process of evaluating. But we think there's lots of merit, especially in the regulatory regime that's been created, to promulgate that across the country. It makes it easier for people to access those markets. And also, what it'll do in the long run, Steve, it'll make it easier to enforce them. The challenge is you got one province, and in a media environment that's done in the conversations with the social media platforms and the Metas and the Google, some have done a very good job and some have done a lousy job. But we've engaged with them, they've engaged with regulators, and things are improving. But it only strengthened numbers, and the more provinces that close up and expand the regulatory regime to removing the opportunities for people to exist in unregulated fashions within their jurisdiction, the sooner those end, the better. Because in the economic benefits, will flow, but also that the consumers have a better regime to protect them, and the things that Canada's done an amazing job when it comes to responsible gaming policy and integrating it into our business from the 90s. That's why, and that's the other part of people talking about, well, you look at what's happening in this jurisdiction or that jurisdiction. I'm like, yeah, we've been there. It's part of, like, between our regulatory standards and operating practices within the industry, we're well ahead a lot of jurisdictions. And that's something to be proud of, and not to sort of have to second guess ourselves because some jurisdiction came up with some idea for reasons, they don't even know why, decided to, whether it's banning advertising, which, without understanding what the effect will be. There's, it sounds good, let's do it. But because there's a lot of unintended outcomes from a lot of these policy changes that don't produce good results.
Hey, gaming news guys! Are you ready to win a bigger share of Canada's rapidly expanding gaming market? Then GBG are ready to help. As the global leaders in identity verification, GBG partner with over 60% of iGaming Ontario brands to help them onboard more players, maximize match rates, and deliver FinTrack compliance. Visit gbgplc.com today and talk to the trust experts. The main reason why I wanted to get you on the show today, Paul, was to talk about what's going on in Ottawa right now, and unless you've been on
nothing, absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Well, there certainly is that. But unless you've been on a deserted island talking to a volleyball for the last month, you know that Justin Trudeau stepped down right after the holidays as the leader of the Liberal Party, and we'll have a new Liberal leader by early March. Parliament's been prorogued until March 24th. There's a lot of people far smarter than I am who cover politics who believe there'll be an election before the end of April. Jeff Zacconi wrote about this in Covers last week. Dave Briggs wrote about it in the Gaming News Canada newsletter, and that's kind of what the status of. You mentioned Bill S269 earlier. There's also Bill S268, which deals with First Nations and gambling jurisdictions. And then I just doing some research for the podcast, Paul, and I forgot the Canadian gaming business had a story right before the holidays about the federal government forming an international work group on integrity of sport, which is looking at safety of athletes, integrity of sport. There's a sports betting component in that. Carla Caltro, who was the federal minister of sport, is now the former federal minister of sport and has been replaced by Peter Duguid. I guess the simple question, Paul, is what's the impact of all of this on the gambling industry and the mandate of you and your members?
Well, pausing some of this legislation isn't necessarily a bad thing. Partly because, as I mentioned earlier, with regarding advertising in Bill S269, a lot of what was being proposed, and it wasn't itself changing any laws. It was a recommendation for the federal government to go and consult with the provinces, and the reality is that there's I saw it as the federal government trying to insert itself into a place where it has no business. It has no business because it has no experience, it has no history. The provinces have been at this for 40 plus years, and they have the best understanding. They have the best measure of what the best opportunity regulations, oversight, and controls are, and they're doing it. And I think that's that was kind of the message we wanted to deliver, is the fact that between um, uh, there's a very strong level of provincial cooperation when it comes to um, responsible gaming measures and research, and there is also a national framework when it comes to uh, you know controlling content for gaming advertising. Not only the regulatory standards in each province, but organizations like Ad Standards Canada and Think TV, which are have every ad that goes on television is reviewed for content by them. Um, I think that those are the kinds of things that I don't know if there was a high level of awareness of what those things existed and what they did, and how integrated these agencies are in working with regulators in gaming industry. And so, and the CRTC even appeared and basically, between ad standards and we're developing a national responsible gaming advertising code. They're quite satisfied because, and there's people, oh, you should look at the CRTC code on alcohol and model that. Well, if you've read that and you've read gaming standards, they look a lot alike, and and a lot of people didn't bother to read them because if you did, you realize, yeah, we got that. We're already there. That's what they're built upon. And so pausing some of this stuff is great. The conversations can happen, but let's have them in a different light. I think in what where we'd like to have them. And I said the role of First Nations gaming in Canada is an important conversation to have. Our position was the bill wasn't the best place to have that conversation because the senators had this appearance that there was untapped resources in the gaming business that could be accessed for the First Nations, and a lot of what they heard in some of the early, they only had a few days of hearings, but the fact is that the land-based gaming business is fairly mature in Canada, and that you would end up doing more shifting of economic benefits between organizations, and could be winners and losers within the First Nation community. And it has to take a step back and and look at, I think, other, moving beyond, uh, First Nations regulatory control over gaming within their jurisdictions. Great discussions to have, but in the light of a bill that, without provincial consultation, without industry or community consultation as part of it, it's not the right way to proceed. And it's a conversation that should come back, and probably will, but hopefully not in the form of a piece of legislation first, but in more of a form of consultation. And so, happily, and it was one of my messages to the Senate, saying if you wanted to do something really productive at this point in time, it'd be taking steps to get Canada to be signatory to the Mackillop Convention. Like, there's something, you have a role, and it's good to see they finally took steps to do some of that, because when I was in front of committee, that was one of the things I said. Like, these are things that within your control. You're trying to insert yourself into provincial jurisdiction where you have no expertise and no history, no authority, other than using the criminal code. But it was a stretch, and things like the Mackillop Convention it's real, and that should have been their priority. And it's nice to see it finally came to that. I know the CCS, the Canadian Centre for Ethics and Sport, done a lot of work, and we support their efforts, and we'll do more to support their efforts once Parliament and the next government get in return, because I think it's an important topic to address. And yeah, so we're not sad about some of those things. The one thing we are disappointed is the overhaul and review of Canada's anti-money laundering legislation is not happening. And we've been quite active through the support of our members and our working group to make a submission. We've made a couple to the federal government over the last few years, and participated in some very good discussions with FinTrack and the finance policy people to modernize the AML legislation. It's woefully out of date for the gaming industry, and for things like sports betting is not mentioned. Right now, if sports book is in a racetrack, they wouldn't have to report, but a sports book in a casino would have to make reports because horse racing is not included. There's all kinds of things in it, that's why we were looking forward to the mandatory review, which didn't happen in 23 or 24 as it was supposed to. and we were hopeful it may have been supposed to happen this month, but that's clearly off the table now. But that legislation is long overdue, and that will give hopefully some clarity, some relief and clarity, and we'd hopefully some streamlining. That the gaming operators directly would report to FinTrack and not do it through their crown agencies. And we demonstrated to FinTrack how that it's much more effective regime, greater information sharing, so people can talk to each other. That was part of a recent update to the act, but it didn't include um, the agents of the reporting entities, which right now is the gaming industry. So that's got to be something that I think will be a priority for the next government, because there's a larger issues in the Canadian economy in terms of financial crime that need to be addressed. But that's one we really would like to see be a priority for the new government.
Paul, it's pretty much a given that there will be a new federal government and there will be the peer probably of the Conservative Party. Is that beneficial to regulated gambling in this country? And if so, how?
Well, I think that the role of the federal government in gaming is very limited,
Right.
and we like to keep it that way. And we think government that the provinces are the best um, place for gaming policy and direction. Actually, I don't think that gaming should be in the criminal code in the form it's in right now. The conduct and manage provisions of I think are woefully outdated, and I think the provinces need more tools to be able to control. And that's I think it's reversing that and outlining what would be illegal, but not making all gaming illegal and then dropping in all these exemptions. I think when you sat through anybody who sat through the liquidity hearing with the Ontario Court of Appeal understands after you're listening to people debate these words and phrases of what this may mean or may not mean, understand that Jesus, can we move on? It's like from 1960s to now, it's like this thing hasn't kept pace, and its relevance is diminishing by the hour in some cases. That the provinces need to give them the tools to fully control their own destinies and what they want to do, and that's always something that we've been our advocates for, because the federal government has had a very limited, only through the criminal code sections. They're not involved in gaming anywhere else. Yes, they benefit from it to the tune of about $1 billion a year in their share of revenue from the provinces, but they do not have any role in setting regulatory regimes or understanding the marketplaces within their jurisdiction, because every province has developed its marketplace to suit what it feels is best for its province, and that's still the best place for that to happen.
Um, yeah, I want to talk about Ontario for a second. I think we may have spoken about this when you were on before Christmas, but uh, with regards to the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, you have a CEO, Dr. Karen Schnarr, who's been in place now, I think, for 6 or 7 months. iGaming
Well,
Ontario
more
is
than a
gonna
year.
more than a year now. Holy crap!
Yeah, it moves
Time
fast.
time flies by. Um, was report iGaming Ontario announced before the holidays that Martha Otten's going to stay on a little longer as executive director of iGaming Ontario, and her successor, who will be the president and CEO of iGaming Ontario, is expected to be in place by spring. I just wonder, does the CGA's relationship has it changed with the AGCO? Does having new leadership means that there may be change between the CGA and IGO? Just what are the dynamics at play there, Paul?
Well, the relationships have always been excellent, in my opinion. I like to think so. um, maybe they don't like me. I don't know. No, it's always. This is one of the things that have built upon the success of has been able to be achieved in Ontario. The AGCO has always been a very approachable organization, and they demonstrated it through the consultation efforts that they put forward to create an iGaming marketplace. To the dynamic they have from land-based gaming too, they were always have been available. They were always, during the first days of the pandemic, before the industry could develop, saying that one of the asks that they had looking for support from the AGCO one. The AGCO had provided about 2/3 of that list, even before it got asked. And the dialogue and the understanding has been strong. And I think that, and the same has been with IGO. There's always been a good dialogue, and they understand their relationship, is through because of the industry operators are there. They're facilitating that relationship with the province, ensuring that they're enjoying their experience in the marketplace, and while providing the conduct and manage responsibilities, they're also ensuring that the market is working effectively, and they've been doing a great job at that. And so it's I think everybody recognizes things work better when everybody talks to one another, and that's been the great benefit of all of this is that we can have frank conversations at times. We can offer how we can support their efforts, or even lead some efforts on their behalf if we need to be able to move issues along. But it's always been, and it's a great dialogue, and that it's something, whether it's the nature of us Canadians and the way we like to do business. But I find that that's been the case pretty much across the country too, and I think that that's um, but with all of um, the activity and the newness to the market, and over the last few years introducing these 50 plus companies that have been to market, and getting them all in, it's that dialogue has been vital to making sure it's a success. If they weren't talking to operators and engaging with industry stakeholders the way they have, it wouldn't have worked as well. And then, to their credit, that's exactly what it will continue. And that's my relationship with any of who hold those leadership positions will always try and be the same. And the fact that we're here to work cooperatively and not adversarially. I mean, if it has to come to that, that's too bad. But I will defend our members and advocate for them.
Right.
But we've always found that it's just, we've had a great dialogue, and it's been productive.
I want to ask you too about the relationship with the Responsible Gambling Council, Paul, only because the RGC's had a leadership change as well. Shelley White's last day was, I think, last a week ago Monday, or a week ago the day that we're recording this interview. Sarah McCarthy is the new chief executive officer. I'm assuming Sarah may even be in Barcelona next week, and you may
I
run
don't know.
into her. But can you just explain to our listeners what that relationship is like, Paul?
Well, again, it's been we had a very cooperative relationship with the RGC, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, and as we led into iGaming. Um, Shelley White also was a member of the CGA's board as a member of our board for 6 years, and her term, because we have term limits on the CGA board, she, after 2 3 year terms, she termed out this past December, along with some others. Um, but we've done a lot of work together, and we'll continue to with the RGC. As I said, they have um, a knowledge and expertise that we tap into, to work with industry. Tracy Parker and Elaine, who are still there as part of that leadership team, have been great resources for us in the industry, the CGA particularly. I look forward to getting to work with Sarah. Um, and I've not met her yet, but I'm sure that we will soon. And because I think it's there's a lot of great things we can do together. And as other markets in Canada look for new expanded regulatory um, marketplaces, they're going to be there. I know, because Shelley's been seeding the ground on all those fronts for the last couple of years with a lot of jurisdictions where they already work with some and want to work more. But no, it's been one of the great joys and benefits of this position I have, is being able to work with great people, and that's where we find in our industry. As I tell a lot of people, don't feel like I'm going to work on any given day, because you get up and you get to talk to a lot of people you would consider, friends as well as colleagues, and so we've got um, a great infrastructure of people that want to do the right thing and are all kind of moving in the same direction, and that's a great part to be a part of, and that's how we want to contribute to that too, and keep the industry moving forward.
Hey, Paul, just a couple of couple more questions before we wrap up this segment,
No
and
problem.
one is we were talking off air about what's going on in crypto right now in sports betting, and we've seen, I think it was crypto.com announced in December that it's going to it's going to be all in on sports betting in the U.S. and there was a rivalry post on LinkedIn today that I think starts out, did you know crypto accounted for 1/4 of global betting handle in Q1 2024? Also, the crypto bet is nearly double the average fiat bet. We know that Rivalry has a token, a crypto token product that it released last year. We also know that I think the AGCO forbids crypto being used by regulated gambling operators in the province here. Just your thoughts again, as crypto, you mentioned off the top, I think, Paul, about technology and data and AI and everything going on. Is crypto just another piece of that evolution of the industry?
It is. The ability for Rivalry to use a token system in Ontario is a great example of that. After working with regulators to making sure they understand how it would work, allowing them to do it. And I think you've talked about like the crypto.com and betting markets and predictive markets. Another demonstration, and from the earlier part of our conversation, and things about sweepstakes, and from years ago from DFS. There's always something new coming, and there's more coming, and this is where governments need to invest in the regulatory regimes and regulators to make sure they can keep pace. And this is a great example of all of that, and how um, because ultimately it's and this is sometimes is not always put in the forefront the way it should be. Um, it's about the customer, and it's about what the customer wants. And it's like offering cashless alternatives inside a casino environment. It's not that a casino is going cashless. Can you offer alternatives for people? Because some people, like me, I don't carry cash anymore, and so you got to start to be able to cater to your customers. And so, when coming out of the early days of the pandemic, we had been drafting regulatory standards for creating cashless environments in land-based casinos, and created a regulatory framework for that for the industry. Nevada then brought one in 2020. It's been revised again to adapt to technology in that state, and I think that these are the things that but the customers going to dictate, and I think that's one of the things we have to be cognizant of the industry, because someone will find a way outside the regulated environment to do what they want to do if they can't do it inside. And that's a challenge for regulators. It's a challenge for industry and everybody to make sure that we're all working in the same direction on the topics and issues that we want to be working on, to be solved. Because yes, it's the innovation is limitless, and technology is taking us in amazing places. And there's a lot of regulators are talking about how the use of AI and what's going to happen in the gaming industry and how that can help. There's on compliance and regulatory oversight. There's lots of great ways. The responsible gaming for monitoring players for risks, for and AML for looking at predictive patterns in data. There's great tools. And so, yeah, we gotta. It's going to be a challenge for everybody, but the it's the inevitability is probably upon us, in the fact that these things are going to have to be how you address them, how you ensure the safeguards that are making it fair for players, fair for regulators, fair for operators, to look at new payment schemes. So,
Last question. As you head off to meet with industry people from all around the world next week, I mean, 2 years ago, it felt like in London, like Canada was kind of a bit of a shining star. I mean, people were excited about Ontario. Everybody you talked to would ask, as a first timer, I was getting questions about Ontario and Canada. You look at the landscape today, there's obviously a lot of excitement around Latin America right now, especially Brazil. I think there's a delegation from Peru that's going to be part of World Regulatory Briefing, or one of those segments that next week. Finland is, conversation about Finland opening up a competitive marketplace, and
Hmm.
then the U.S. obviously operators and suppliers, the whole industry is very interested in having iGaming expanded beyond the 6 or 7 states it's in legally right now, and maybe legal sports betting gets launched in Missouri in 2025. There's a feeling that Minnesota may be the next state to move in that direction. I just wonder, Paul, is there pressure on you from, your members are people that are working across different jurisdictions. They're just not operating in Canada. Is there any pressure, or maybe I'm asking the question the wrong way, but are those questions that you deal with all the time from your members on, hey, this is happening in this country, we need this to happen in Alberta, or why aren't things moving more quickly in Quebec?
Yeah, and I think it's part of that's where this year we're going to start taking our conversations to the governments, because um, to the status quo doesn't work. It's sorry with if you're thinking you have a monopoly, you don't. You haven't had one for 25 years in Canada. The fact that they've got the makings of being able to have very good marketplaces, fully regulated, and but they need to it requires change and investment in some ways, because I think that when you look at um, government revenues, provincial government revenues from gaming, while are good numbers, they're big numbers. When you're looking at a couple of $1 billion from in Ontario, Quebec, and some that there's also a case that you have to take measures if you want to protect those revenue lines, and that's what we try and talk to them about, is to saying it's one, the gaming marketplace is changing, customer preferences are evolving, ensuring that you're being able to meet that, to meet the needs, to be able to. It's a highly competitive marketplace. There is, there's not new greenfield opportunities in the gaming space are limited these days, and so you're looking through growth through innovation. And so you have to create a regulatory climate to allow that to happen. You have to beyond that consumers have chosen, with their feet and their dollars and their wallets, where they want to go and what they want to do, and that's a reflection of, you can't force those, and you have to be adaptable, and you have to make sure that you're overseeing um, a dynamic marketplace and industry, that means you have to do things differently than you may have done. Like, we passed our Gaming Control Act in 1985, and we don't need to see the changes. Yeah, you do, because it doesn't work anymore. It's not serving the intended audiences that you wanted to do. You're not fully regulating your gaming marketplace the way you once were, because technology, innovation, public, consumer preference, everything has changed. Everything's evolving quickly, but there's a great opportunity, and that's the other side. Like, you look at the charitable gaming sector in Ontario, and you look at being able to participate and carve out bingo for the charitable sector. Good policy decision, I think, because in the long run they've benefited greatly. Those companies have been able to either bring people together and partner to offer on site, or do it on their own. Have done great work, and I think that there's some parts of the sectors and charitable sectors in certain parts of this country that probably could use a boost like that. But they just need to be able to start to look and dialogue and figure out what the opportunities are to better protect consumers, while at the same time capturing economic benefits. It's just, you're not going to do it the same way you did. And if they accept that, and they still have a role, and they're still good partners to work with, but you got to start talking, and you got to start dialoguing to better understand what you need to do to make that happen. And just standing and calling things illegal when they're not is that's it's rolling on deaf ears. So it's time to get beyond that and start to get to a conversation, because the calling it illegal is nice, but it's not true. It's not, it's we have large unregulated marketplaces because our laws don't make it illegal, but they don't make it legal either. So that's why it requires conversations, because if provincial governments earn a lot of these, big dollars in revenue, you have to take measures to protect it. And that sometimes, you got to make those investments that are in the regulatory side, in creating regimes to make sure it's effective and it works. And it works and sustainable for everyone that's in the marketplace. I talk to casino operators in Alberta who want to be in the online business, same in British Columbia, and they can't be, and they can't create that full omni-channel experience for their customer, being able to play with them and outside, and have a rewards program, and all of those things that make that attractive for a land-based casino to be able to leverage their products into the online world for their customers. They need better be able to take advantage of that, and it's the natural evolution of where we've been, and will continue to evolve. And so it's challenging, exciting, but it's some honest conversations that have to be had, because the status quo doesn't work. And Ontario is a good demonstration of why you can't just stand still.
Paul Burns is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Gaming Association. Paul, always grateful for your time. Wish you safe travels to Spain later this week, and I look forward to catching up when you're back in Canada.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Always a good conversation, and we'll catch up soon. But thanks for having me.
Back in the spring of 2023, some of the best-known iGaming operators in the world got together to lead the creation of the Quebec Online Gaming Coalition. Since then, the coalition has been an ubiquitous voice in advocating for the development of a new regulatory framework for the online gaming industry in La Belle Province. The coalition has a new spokesperson, Ariane Gauthier, who tapped the keyboard for an op-ed in Le Journal de Montréal last week to continue to push for a new legal gambling marketplace. To give our loyal listeners some information and insight into that article, we welcome to the Gaming News Canada show, pour la première fois, Ariane Gauthier. Ariane, merci beaucoup for being here, and I promise that will be the end of me torturing our audience with mon mauvais français.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Steve.
Hey, Ariane, let's start with if you can maybe just give a summary of the op-ed you wrote for Le Journal, and why the coalition decided that the timing was right for you to write this op-ed.
Yeah, so we had a look at Loto-Quebec's net revenues as presented in their annual reports, and we simply adjusted the numbers for inflation. The result was quite clear. Loto-Quebec's revenue have been declining for 20 years, so it's not the message we usually get from Loto-Quebec. So, given that responsible gaming experts don't see a decrease in gambling, one may ask, why is Loto-Quebec net revenues are declining? And for the Quebec Online Gaming Coalition, it's interesting to look at what's going on in online gaming.
Ariane, I guess maybe there's two parts to this question, and that's one, you have to assume that if Loto-Quebec had a decline, that doesn't mean that there's less gambling going on among Quebecers, that they're using illegal operators, and I'm sure you've been following the Canadian Gaming Coalition, the coalition of provincial lottery and gaming coalitions from across Canada, which would argue that there are operators who are licensed in Ontario, for example, who are operating illegally in Quebec. How does the coalition respond to that?
Well, for the coalition, it's quite clear that the regulatory framework for gaming in Quebec was put in place at a time when you had to take your car, shovel the snow, and get physically to the casino. So today the game is on internet. It gains momentum. It's a deep trend. It won't go away. And in that context, a state monopoly such as Loto-Quebec, it's completely obsolete. It presents flaws for public health, and it brings less revenue for government. So trying to enforce a monopoly over internet is doomed to fail. So Quebec must pivot to something else. And we want to open this conversation so the Quebec government will be able to decide what's good in Quebec. But for sure, the actual and the current model with Loto Quebec, it's not doing its job.
Ariane, a topic I spoke with your predecessor, Natalie Bergeron, quite often about, both for the newsletter and for the podcast, was about the challenges of the coalition getting its voice through to the government. And that seems to me that's even a more difficult challenge right now with the political climate, not only in your province, but across Canada. And of course, you're well aware of the threat of tariffs being imposed by the incoming Donald Trump administration, and what's going on right now in terms of Canada putting together hopefully a cohesive economic strategy right now to deal with the incoming president. I'm just wondering, can you provide our listeners with an update on your attempts to, have those conversations with the Premier Francois Legault, the Finance Minister Eric Girard, and perhaps other members of the provincial government in Quebec?
So, yeah, I think the way to get attention is, and that's what we did in our pre-budget submission, is to focus on the economic side of the equation. So Quebec government is facing a historic deficit, budgetary deficit. So, and they ask strong corporations such as Loto Quebec to bring in more money. But as we saw in the op-ed I've published, Loto Quebec net revenue are declining. So I think by bringing more a larger view on the iGaming regulatory system and including private players in it, it could bring more money to the table and help government to deal with this budgetary deficit. And we're talking for, in terms of revenue for the government, to $200 and $300 million each year. So it's a game changer on the economic side. But the coalition still aims to work with the government on two objectives. So develop a strong and coherent, responsible online gaming environment in Quebec to ensure safety for all players, whether they choose to play with private platforms or Loto Quebec, and conclude a revenue sharing agreement so the industry can contribute to the government revenues, like I said, especially in the context of a major deficit in the province. So I think that's where we can get the attention, but we will still want to work on both angles of the question.
Ariane, as I mentioned off the top of this interview, your bosses are some of the biggest players in the iGaming market. You look at Betway and Rush Street Interactive. I believe FanDuel and Bet365 are also members of the coalition. I'm assuming the fact that you're in the position as a spokesperson now, that the coalition is still very much committed to seeing a expanded marketplace in Quebec.
Yes, for sure. There's an interest to be present and to be an operator in the Quebec province. And member of the coalition want to evolve in a transparent and clear regulatory environment. The actual gray market, it's not comfortable for anybody, either the government, Loto Quebec, or the private companies, including the members of the Quebec Online Gaming Coalition.
Hey, Ariane, last question. Has the coalition added any more members over the past year? And it's been a while since we've spoken with someone from the coalition, so we just wonder if you have any new members.
So we still have 8 members, the same members that were with the coalition at its beginning 2 years ago.
Ariane Gauthier is the new spokesperson for the Quebec Online Gaming Coalition. Ariane, we really appreciate you joining the podcast to give us the I guess really the translation of the op-ed that you wrote for Le Journal de Montréal, and we certainly look forward to having you back on the Gaming News Canada show later this year.
Thank you for having me, and looking back to coming talk to you again.
That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show. Thanks again to both Ariane Gauthier and Paul Burns for being our guests. As always, you can find the podcast at gamingnewscanada.ca and also on our YouTube channel and on the various podcast platforms. We really appreciate your support. Very grateful to our presenting sponsor, GBG Plc, and we look forward to seeing everybody again very soon.